So this podcast probably needs a little bit of an introduction, Clay, I think, because this, if you're listening to the show the first time through and you're working your way through season 2 of TNG, you're like, why did the sound quality change all of a sudden? What's happened? Who is this Clay person? We're going back and we're going to be doing The Measure of a Man as a Patreon episode, so welcome patrons to all that. But eventually, just no patrons, after a couple months go by, I might replace the actual podcast that's currently up there with this patron podcast. So
also, I would like to say, Wes, that I was on the first season as well, so everybody is well familiar with me and my antics.
Who is this new? Who are these 5 years senior versions of these characters who've gone back in time and sound totally different?
Well, now I'm using my old microphone because my interface broke. So I'm using my old microphone in order to make it sound more like it did at that time.
It's like a film grain filter on your new digital,
exactly.
new digital video. All right, so we're going to be talking about The Measure of a Man. That's all the brouhaha for this. So this may be a normal podcast at some point, but everything is normal. You can go listen to our more modern podcast if you want sound that sounds like this. And otherwise, patrons, thank you.
I like this. It's an ad for the future in the past.
Yep, it is, 100%. So check out the most modern podcast if you're catching up now. Patrons, thank you very much for supporting the show. This is your second Patreon special of the month. And after this break, we're going to play some music.
Accessing library computer data.
And to make sure history never forgets the name Enterprise.
All right, so the episode we're up to now is The Measure of a Man. It is the 9th episode of the second season, aired on February 13th, 1989. It was written by Melinda Snodgrass, which is a funny last name, directed by Robert Shearer. In this episode, Picard must prove Data is legally a sentient being with rights and freedoms under Federation law when transfer orders demand Data's reassignment for study in disassembly. The reason we're coming back to this, listeners and patrons, is because the Picard series has just started. We watched the first episode, and Measure of a Man is weighing fairly heavily into the Picard series, it seems, at this point. So, Clay, you had not seen this the first time we went through, and you didn't podcast about it. So, Here we are. First, how does it feel to go back to season 2 of TNG after 5 years have gone by, or whatever it's been? And then secondly, what did you think of Measure of a Man?
Going back is interesting. I still can't get over how good the HD looks on Netflix.
Because we just got over DS9, which does not have a remastered version.
Hasn't been remastered, yeah. The ships look great, the station looks great, all that stuff. I've always been fascinated by the early seasons. I guess it would be the season 1 and 2 uniforms. I think they change in season 3.
Yep.
But they have that extra, like, navy stripe sort of thing on the shoulders.
Yeah, so like as if they were wearing that little, like, not cape thing, but the little little scarf thing that Navy officers wear over their shoulders.
Yeah, it's like the illusion of a boat neck cut.
Yeah,
and it makes everybody oddly enough seem thinner. Maybe they were just thinner. I don't know, but it's a detail that adds kind of a lot. But I don't really miss it when they redid it. I do want to say, this episode brings to mind something that someone said on Twitter not too long ago that I don't think we've properly addressed. This is not directly related to this episode, but why not talk about it here? Someone said that they couldn't imagine that people in Star Trek were having sex because it seems so antiseptic,
such
and
a clinical universe that no one's ever getting down and doing the nasty.
Whereas in Star Wars, you could easily imagine people having a gross quickie in the desert or something. Mm-hmm. I disagree with that so much. And this episode is a perfect example of why. This episode essentially opens with Picard being super horny.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is a series where in the second episode of the show, they have Tasha Yar have sex with Data. there's an entire running plot line in Deep Space Nine about how hard Worf fucks.
Yeah.
Like it's incredibly sexy.
Yeah, I mean, Kirk has numerous relationships with women. Yeah.
Kirk's defining popular characteristic is that he bangs everything that moves. So I don't know where that seemed like the kind of point of view of someone who might not really be familiar with the show.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if you had anything to say about that.
The commander is a physical representation of a dream, an idea conceived of by the mind of a man. Its purpose, to serve human needs and interests.
It's a collection of neural nets and heuristic algorithms.
Its responses dictated by an elaborate software written by a man. Its hardware built by a man. And now a man will shut it off. Pinocchio is broken. Its strings have been cut.
Yeah, well, I think that actually ties into my big thing, now that we're 5 years removed from watching A Measure of a Man and going back to the second season of TNG, is that the first season is not very good of TNG. The second season, I think, is better, and that's where this episode comes in. But both of them really highlight to me, before the change in the series happened in season 3, when it became TNG that we know as like a kind of popular pop culture memory of what TNG actually is. Mm-hmm. The first 2 seasons of TNG are really a very interesting version of What If TOS, but just 100 years later. Like it's very much a... They mention in this episode how they are now bringing law to a land that they've explored at this point. Mm-hmm. So they've moved on from the TOS thing of exploration and everything. And now they're sort of ironically in a DS9 version of like settling the frontier. And what's funny about that is that like the bombast and excitement of TOS has been replaced by an episode that's basically a lot of paperwork and debating the law with each other.
Right.
Like it's really funny how this series is just kind of what happens when the bureaucrats take over space. And I think that's really fascinating, and I think that's really interesting to watch here. Like, scenes are built around the drama of Picard's like, pull up all the terms of service we've got on how to transfer an officer, and then he glares at his computer screen and stuff like that.
I can see that Data did not click agree when they asked him to on the user agreement.
He didn't sign line 21B section 2. My God, we've got him this time. But it's really interesting, and I gave this episode a you can talk on that after a second. I gave this a 4 out of 5 the first time through, because I think this is a very good episode, but not a classic. And I do think that holds up for me. It is a 4 out of 5. I think it's really interesting. I think it's probably where the series started to branch out into something other than the first season TOS direct ripoffs and started to do its own thing. But it really stood out to me how it's just a evolved version of TOS this early, and down to the fact that the characters haven't gone to that third season thing of TNG where they start really characterizing them as like fully fleshed people. They're still extremely archetypical in these early seasons. Like it's very, they're very much drawn as just like their roles are what their characters are at that point. And it's fascinating.
Yeah, I think Riker, let me back up. I think the characters in this actually work better for me than I expected them to, but I think that's a symptom of going back and watching older episodes, having watched everything else. And so you're sort of imprinting your more popular classic understanding of the characters onto characters who haven't been that fleshed out yet.
Yeah.
Like Riker, for instance. While you were saying that, I was going to say, well, Riker seems pretty on the ball as far as what I remember Riker being. And then I thought about it for a second. I was like, well, he doesn't really do anything in this. He's just sort of there. He has the one scene at the beginning that's not, obviously he does stuff, but
he's the prosecutor of this episode.
Yeah. Obviously he plays a huge role in the story, but like he's character wise, he doesn't really have much to do. He's a little bit conflicted about who Data is and stuff, but there's nothing that screams like, oh, that's Riker.
Right. There's nothing uniquely Riker that you could not replace him with Crusher and have the same function happen.
Yeah, you could do the same. Honestly, I'm surprised they didn't use Geordi.
Yeah.
Because Geordi, they actually have him express that he's friends with Data. They could have used Crusher. They could have used the Doctor. They could have Pulaski. They could have used anybody. But yeah, I really like this. I think I've seen it in the past before. I'm definitely aware of it. But kind of jumping off what you were talking about, the difference between this being sort of an evolved version of TOS and they're focusing on the bureaucracy. It's actually a more traditional, like Asimovian sort of sci-fi story where, like, I feel like this could have been right at home in iRobot, where it's a story about androids and sentience, but it's told through the lens of a courtroom deliberation, not through any sort of like space opera. You know, it's a fairly mundane setup that is being used to thoughtfully explore a lot of high concept stuff, which obviously I love.
Yep.
Although the people listening might not know that yet. You'll get there. But I thought it was great. And thinking about it in terms of Picard, I'm wondering if Guinan's speech isn't the crux of the story in Picard.
No, that definitely sticks out once you've seen the opening of Picard. Yeah.
Because I mean, you watch this episode, and after seeing the first episode of Picard, and you're kind of like, oh, so Bruce Maddox eventually created a synth army, and the synth army became slaves, and then they revolted and killed everybody. Just like Guinan said.
And Picard, in his closing argument, I think pitches even more accurately what the series is going to be about. It's like, do you have the right, just because you can make these things, to have some kind of control over them, is what I'm assuming Picard is going to do at this point. And so this really, if you want, I think, I don't want this to be too Picard heavy, but I think that if you're watching the first episode of Picard, rewatching Measure of a Man actually gives you a better grounding, I think, for where the series is going to go. Not that I think Picard did a bad job, but this is like, they're very much drawing off of what this episode did, Measure of a Man. Yeah.
I think they're going to get there in Picard once they start digging into this stuff.
Yes. Do you think Bruce Maddox will be in the Picard series?
I would be surprised if he's not. I don't know if they're going to use the same guy.
Yeah.
But I would be shocked if he doesn't show up. Yeah.
You know what? I give this a 4 out of 5. And before we get into the stuff that I really like, the reason this is not an all-time classic to me is because outside of the Data on trial aspect, like whether or not Data is a sentient creature, I think the episode struggles for conflict, and it's so contrived, every other conflict that they make up to put into this episode to have some drama go on. Like, Picard and this woman being in a relationship really doesn't add anything to the story.
I actually really like that stuff.
You like that stuff. My other thing is, we can break these down one by one. Yeah. Riker being forced to prosecute Data is absurd. That this is the way that this is going to go on, especially because...
I like that too.
Why? Because all the way, like, besides the fact that this is just a bizarre conflict of interest, when the judge is like, and if I can tell that you're not really trying, I'm going to kick Data out of Starfleet. It's like, this is absurd. Like, how are you supposed to tell that someone's doing a good job prosecuting something? I think it's just so... Like, I don't see any reason why, other than you need main characters in the story, that Maddox himself wouldn't be the prosecutor of this case. Yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah. I like the Riker thing because I do think it's a really interesting conflict for Riker to have, as far as him being friends with Data, but then being forced to be the prosecutor who has to do prosecute the case to the best of his ability to possibly kill him. I just find that to be an interesting character thing. Is it contrived? Yes, totally. But I think that it works for the story.
Yeah. Pinocchio's strings are cut.
Yeah, that's a little bit over dramatic there, Will.
I like Picard's line, though. He's like, Riker's presentation was devastating.
It was devastating. He's so good. He's so dramatic. It's excellent. And I liked the stuff with Picard and what's her name? Lavoie, I think.
Is that the judge?
Yes.
I'll look it up. I don't know off the top of my head.
I know that it's Philippa because when he said that, all I could think of was Discovery.
It is Louvois. Louvois.
Yeah. I like that stuff because it's not really delved into. It is sort of a manufactured thing to bring up tension between Picard and the judge, but I enjoy it as a piece of character work in that you are implying there is a history to Picard and that Picard has a life and that Picard, likes to bone down. From time to time.
Picard has not always been a stuffy diplomat. He got down in his younger days. Yeah.
And he has people in his past that he's going to have varying reactions to, but we don't need to spend 15 minutes with a scene like halfway through the trial where the two of them, finally hash out what happened 30 years ago or some shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think they stumble a little. Like I'm totally fine with that kind of background and that being the thing. I feel that the conflict that it brings up is just kind of unnecessary. Like Picard comes in, he's like, Philippa, we have to defend Data, and he's going to be taken apart by Starfleet. She's like, oh, aren't you particularly randy right now? He's like, not now, Philippa. Like, it's that kind of weird.
Sure.
It's kind of a weird. It's a strange character trait for Philippa to have, I suppose, because she's constantly kind of distracted by Picard. Like, and she's always dropping lines about like how great he was in bed and stuff like previously.
Yeah, I mean that's true. She's not probably I guess it depends on how you view this stuff, but she's probably not the most well fleshed out female character.
And I think it just adds to, in the way that Riker is being the prosecutor, it just adds all these weird conflict of interests into something that that don't really seem to make sense and are kind of distracting from what I think is actually interesting, which is the Data point about it. It ultimately doesn't do a great amount of damage, and I understand on a technical level, you have to have your main character. Second billing is Frakes at this point, so he has to have a prominent role in the episode. It's just one of those things.
I think it's worth it for that last scene with Riker and Data, though.
Yeah.
I think that's a really nice button to everything where Riker feels terrible about what he had to do. And then Data uses his data logic to tell him, like, no, if you hadn't done this, which was something that was damaging to yourself, I possibly could be dead right now. So right. I like that. I thought, and they say the thing about being friends and whatnot. Is this the first poker instance in the show?
I don't think so. I think they've done that before. I'm not 100% sure. It very well could be.
Well, all the new listeners just jumped off because we didn't know that detail.
Yeah, I'll look it up right now. But what did you think about that poker scene?
I thought it was good. I thought it was. I thought it was a good. It reminded me a little bit of, and I mean, maybe I'm only thinking this because it's most recent and they do this a lot more in TNG than I remember. But it reminded me kind of what they would do in Deep Space Nine, where
this is the first poker scene. Interesting.
It is. Okay. Yeah. It makes sense that it is because it has a point. It's not just them dicking around having a conversation. Like there's a thematic point to it.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of the way that they do that stuff in Deep Space Nine, where early on in the episode, usually during the cold open, they'll have a scene that is thematically relevant to the rest of the episode, unless it's about the Alamo, in which case it never pays off. But
it's still building to this day.
Yeah. But yeah, I liked it. I liked that. I liked what they were doing with it. I liked that it sort of came back a little bit later in the discussion with what's his name? Maddox. I think do you think it would be a sign of a lesser show or a better show if it ended with Data like lying on the stand and bluffing or something? You know what I mean? Because that seems like the natural setup is like, oh, Data learns what a bluff is, so he gets out of a jam later in the episode by bluffing.
Yeah. That's like the comedy version of the episode, I guess. Yeah.
And then at the end, Riker's like, Data, I'm happy you're still here, but you just committed perjury. He's like, well, then technically I'm not human and they can't do anything to me. So
I can't break
I'm not
your
bound
laws.
by your laws. Yeah.
I like the poker scene. I think it adds a little bit. It's kind of a strange metaphor in some ways. Like I always think that it's not quite on with what they're talking about, but I honestly, I kind of have the sense across the entire script, which is not really a problem. It's very much a TNG Star Trek-y thing, but I always feel that they kind of dance around the point for a great amount of the episode before really delving into it. And I don't need like a hard breakdown of like the terms and sentience and things like that. Like what I think they're really asking is a very interesting question that it has like some real world repercussions and stuff like that based on what they go through. But it always feels
somewhere in another universe, R2D2 and C3PO are like,
what about
railing
us?
Against their chains. This is the favorite episode of the droid from Solo, I think.
The thick droid. I think that it sort of dances around it for a long time. I'm not 100% sure that it really ever clearly makes a case, but it's not really all that vital because the courtroom scene stuff is pretty a small chunk of the episode. It actually doesn't get started in the courtroom until maybe the last third or something like that. And up until that point, it's like sort of building up the Maddox character. It's kind of checking in with Data. Data resigns, things like that. You have a couple good scenes with Picard and Data and things like that. I think it's a very strong episode that is certainly like pinnacle what good Star Trek of the 90s used to kind of be. It's very prototypical of what like classic episodes of Star Trek would eventually become, I think.
Yeah. I'm really happy that they resisted the urge to turn Maddox into like a mustache twirling villain, which I think they probably could have done in the past.
Yeah.
Or I shouldn't say mustache twirling, but giving him more of a malicious intent to what he's doing. Whereas he's
more portrayed as incompetent. He's more portrayed as like an incompetent scientist, really.
Yeah, he's trying to
rush it. He's trying to rush his drug to get FDA approval.
Yeah, he's using the wrong screwdriver on the wrong screw, essentially.
Yeah.
And hoping that it's going to work anyway. But like they could have easily made him a bit more insidious as far as his intentions, but he just kind of comes off. He's like, yeah, I want to do research. Yeah, I might kill you, but that's science.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting.
He keeps it fairly impersonal, and I actually think one of the things I appreciated too, especially in light of that review of Picard that we were talking about offline, I don't know, is that Picard himself, at first anyway, when defending Data before the trial, never defends him for personal reasons. Like he never says, "Oh, he's a person, he's my friend." It's always, he's a valued member of Starfleet, and Starfleet officers have rights.
Yeah, he's a valued member of my crew, my bridge crew. I need him there doing this job.
Yeah, it's not a personal connection. However, that being said, there are clear instances, though not really dwelled on in this episode, that they are friends. Like Picard gave him that book.
Yep.
They make mention of a couple other things that are more personal. Apparently, Picard knows that he boned down with Tasha.
Yeah,
because he was not particularly surprised about it, and he was like, "No, tell us what happened
in great detail."
The only thing that I miss, that I think that they blew it, is 2 seasons later. If they were doing this episode when Data says they were intimate, that cut to Riker, full on Riker eyes. I think.
The raised
eyebrows
eyebrow.
up.
Yep.
Oh, that would have been great.
He hadn't mastered that look at that point, but that's definitely something that they would be sure to get some coverage on in the future. Because I think that you're right about Maddox, and I think that it's important. I would say that Maddox is slightly mustache twirling here. He's slightly,
little bit, yeah.
He's slightly set up as a dubious character, and I think the performance does a lot for that. Like he's portrayed kind of as a stubborn scientist who's just like, let me do this my way, kind of. And I think
the performance is a little Dr. Frankenstein-y at times.
It's very theatrical, right?
Yeah, like he's like, I must take a look inside your brain, Data.
Yes. Anyway, tapping his forehead very dramatically as he's like figuring out
what is life, that kind of stuff.
But what
Not quite that big.
What I think Maddox does well, and I think that the episode actually sells him short a little bit, because I think you could potentially rewrite this episode to make Maddox have actually a stronger point than he seems to here. because once Picard cross-examines him, he kind of crumbles immediately, which makes sense for Picard's argument. But I think there's a lot of strength to Maddox's point of view of prove to me that he actually does have sentience. Prove to me that Data is a person. Like Picard has the easier job of flipping it around and saying to Maddox, prove that. But I feel that Maddox's point of prove to me, Picard, that he actually does have something is also equally difficult for Picard to prove. And I think that's kind of the genius of the episode.
I would agree. I think Picard does a much better job than Maddox does, though. Because, I mean, I think the thing Picard leads with as far as, excuse me, bringing out all of these things that Data is taking with him when he leaves the ship is probably his strongest evidence for sentience. Because, I mean, generally, non-sentient beings don't have nostalgia for things, or don't have, if they say, all right, let's go, it's time to go, they're not going to bring their favorite toy with them or something.
Yep.
And having that level of feeling towards things, that is the reason that he brings them, is because they elicit a specific emotion. If you were to listen to Data talk about that, which they actually don't really ask him about it, I was surprised that they didn't.
Yeah, there's very little Data point of view, actually, for an episode about Data. Yeah.
If you were to ask him about it, I'm sure he would give you this, like, fairly clinical technobabble answer. But his answer is not really any different than really what happens to when it's not really any different than why people do the same thing. It's just he can identify it as a scientifically and mathematically in a way that humans can't.
I think that Picard's good point is saying to Maddox, prove to me that I'm sentient, basically, which is it's not a scientific question as much as it's kind of a philosophical question, which is really interesting. I think that if you were to rewrite this, I think 20 years later, like in the time of, it's 30 years later, whatever it's been, I think there's
31 years.
31 years later, I think there's been if you were to rewrite this, I think that there's potential room to be really interesting in ending the episode, the audience itself not quite sure what to make of Data at that point. Sure. Because I think that Maddox could argue, say that Data is programmed to want these nostalgic things. Like, that does not prove sentience in and of itself. Data is still just because Data wants these things does not prove that he has some kind of conscious attachment to it in a way. And you start getting into weird things where in this episode, Picard says, we're also machines, we're just biological machines, which is true. And it's very hard to tell where your programming starts and ends. But my favorite thing about the Data episodes that they eventually get into much later is the peak, weird Data is the one, Clues, I think, where the crew gets knocked out. Data's the only one left alive, and aliens tell him, we're extremely xenophobic and you can't know about us. So Data, you have to take the ship back and then build this mystery about what happened while everyone was unconscious without exposing who we are. And
I do not remember that episode.
It's a really strong episode because everyone wakes up, right? And Data's just acting weird. And it's very creepy to have scenes where Data is lying to you about something and you don't know why he's doing that. And I think that every time that the show gets into Data as an automaton and not just exploring his human side, but also the fact that he is not really organic on some level, whatever that means for humans, I think is really interesting. And I think that this episode, that's not the point of this episode, but I think that you could rewrite it in that way to leave a little bit of what is going on inside Data's head by the end of it.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that would be, I think you could do that without abandoning the outcome either.
Right.
I think there's still room for them to win and for them to feel good about winning, but for you also to be come away being well, yeah, I mean, I agree with those points, but also I don't know. There's a lot here that I don't particularly understand or know how to process at the moment.
Because the ending, to me, the ending is kind of a fail-safe ending. It's just in case this is the case where he's sentient, we can't go through with this kind of thing. And you can still leave wonderment at the end about that. You know, a glimpse of Data staring off into nothing, like wondering what this blank expression on Data's face means and stuff like that. But I totally agree. I don't think you need to flip it around and say that Data's not worth protecting and that these things are not worth protecting, because I think that they are. But I think that the question about it is almost as interesting as the determination that they make by the end of it.
Yeah, and I mean, technically, the ruling that comes down is not that Data is a sentient being. The ruling that comes down is that he is not the property of Starfleet, therefore he can make his own decisions.
Right, yeah.
And because, I mean, Picard's argument after the sentience thing, he even says that's not really the point here.
Right.
The point is whether or not this person, thing, whatever, if we have the right to own him or own it.
Yep.
And he kind of goes down that road. And I think that's it's really interesting that that's how things shake out. Like, I think a lesser show would have been like, the court finds that Lieutenant Commander Data is a real boy or some shit, you know? Whereas this one, they kind of like sidestep it.
Yeah.
And because I don't know if you can answer that question, honestly, there's no definitive answer to it. So Picard has to, you know,
use the slavery argument instead.
Yeah. Which is also really interesting. It was making me think of, In the Mountains of Madness, the H.P. Lovecraft story, where I've always found it fascinating that though a fairly well-known racist, he has this creature that he created called the Shoggoth, which is essentially, it's a slave. It's this creature created to do tasks by this ancient civilization, and they keep evolving it to do all these tasks and making it stronger and stronger and making more and more of them, and eventually they revolt and kill everybody. And while you could probably read that through maybe his lens of like, this is why we shouldn't let black people into the country, I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting concept of at what point do the things that you are making to serve you decide they don't want to serve you anymore. Right. And that's what made me start thinking so much about Picard and how that's going to shake out, and how Maddox's intent here is kind of, that's the most sinister thing, I think. He himself isn't sinister. It's just, I think his intent is sinister and maybe not totally thought through.
Yeah, he's kind of naive, I guess, as to what the possible bad outcomes of what he's doing would be. Yeah. I agree with that. I think that Maddox is the bad scientist in the sense that first of all, his thing that like he clearly loves Data and is like enthralled by him. So it's strange that he's like, I'm willing to take a coin flip about whether or not this melts your brain or not. That seems kind of strange. But he is just the overeager scientist who I think if you wanted to really play up his if you were to modernize this in a Picard sense, I think you would say you would build off of his personality as someone who wanted to do whatever it took to become an important figure in his field, which they don't really get into here. He's not portrayed as a someone just after the glory of what it is in a way that Soong isn't. But Soong's pretty interesting. Soong is not in this episode, but I think that we didn't really talk about him, how he is Soong being the creator of Data was a really interesting choice to make him basically a mystical figure in a lot of ways. Like
Making who a mystical figure?
Soong, a mystical figure. Soong is not a Maddox character, right? When you meet Soong, he talks about Data in a way that as if he is a real person. He doesn't get it into like advanced mathematics or like the programming aspects of it. Soong is just seen as this kind of godlike figure that makes these things, and it's almost like he doesn't even know what he's doing when he makes them. Right. And I think that was just a really interesting choice, and I think that you're going to potentially you could play with that in Maddox in the future. If Maddox eventually becomes a Soong-like character, you can portray him as the things that Soong did correctly are not what Maddox did correctly at all, and the difference between those two outcomes are the differences that lead to the two different series.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like Maddox's approach was ill-conceived as well. Because, I mean...
The first question they ask him, he's like, no, I don't know. They're like, well, fuck. he's like, can you unplug my electrical outlet? He's like, no, I haven't gotten that far. They're like,
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, probably. But But yeah, like he shows up and he's like, I've got transfer orders. You have to come with me. I'm going to do this thing to you. And Data is obviously like, no, I'm not going to do that. Whereas if he was like, hey, Data, I'm working on this stuff. I would like to work on this. I would like you to help me work on this because obviously you are the only one in existence. And I think
you're the expert.
Yeah, you're the expert. We could do this together. Probably a better chance of working. And then once you get them, you stick them, you unplug whatever you want. But no, I'm obviously kidding. But,
you mean build up the sort of villainy in it in a way?
No. I mean, I'm thinking. I was just joking about the last part. I think if.
But I mean, you could start like I'm always. I know that they want to get right into the episode, but they don't play Maddox as trying to befriend Data and then unveiling his plan.
Right.
You know
I'm talking irrespective of the show. I'm just talking about his approach in general. Should have, if he didn't want this outcome of being completely rejected, he should have just been like, hey, maybe we work on this together. I don't know. But obviously then you don't have a fun episode of TV to watch.
Data, you want to sleep over my house tonight? And he just wakes up in the middle of the night with like Maddox just standing over him with a buzzsaw or something like that.
I've always also been fascinated by Noonien Sung because of the name. And I looked this up finally because I always thought I was remembering it incorrectly. But Noonien Sung is very similar to Khan Noonien Singh.
Yeah, Roddenberry's college roommate, right?
I guess I think it was a roommate. It was a friend of his that he had who went missing after World War II.
Oh, really? Okay, never mind. Not nearly as jovial as I thought.
Unless I misread it, but that's what I think I read.
Yes. So he reused the same name kind of twice.
Yes. Yeah. Which, if you're a continuity nerd, brings up a lot of questions.
I know. Imagine if that came out nowadays, we'd have decades
people would lose their minds.
Internet people wondering why the names are so similar.
I'm sure there's a novel or a comic book that explains the connection between Noonien Singh and Noonien Sung, or like someone somewhere is like, yeah, Noonien was actually a really popular name, or I don't know.
Yeah.
I was also imagining the end after the trial where Data says to Maddox, he's like, I look forward to hearing more about your work. I was imagining that it was played out like the end of the Chappelle Show Prince skit, where he takes a step off screen and then takes a step back in and just goes, bitch.
Like for whatever cute things you come up with, Mr. Maddox. It has the nice TNG 80s genre button of Maddox calls him instead of it at the very end, and that's to show us that he's actually learned something. They do the equally late 80s genre show of a character comments on the fact that he has done that, even though it's very obvious that he's called him a he for the first time.
Yeah.
Yeah, anything else about this one? I think it's a good episode. You sound more positive. I'm actually honestly surprised you still like the Riker thing. The Riker thing always sticks out to me as a really strange thing. Not that I dislike it, but just that it's so obviously a construct to get your cast members involved in something.
Yeah, no, I just find it I find it to be an interesting concept that they put into that they execute fairly well. It's very contrived to do that.
The one great moment is when Riker is reviewing or prepping for his case. He finds the flaw that he's going to use, and he breaks down in a smile because he realizes he's got him, and then he frowns because he knows that he's got him at the same time.
Yeah.
I really like that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think they could have maybe thrown in a line or something about Maddox not being able to represent himself because he's not a certain rank or something. I don't know, but the excuse that they came up to do that, I thought was fine, even though it is fairly silly. But
you better try really hard. You better not get it up there and not try. Yeah.
If I can see your fingers crossed behind your back, you are going straight to the brig, mister. And
I think that we were kind of laughing at Riker's presentation. Riker's presentation is maybe 1/10 of a point too melodramatic or something.
Yes.
But I do think what he does to Data is effective in some way. Like it's to take off his arm and then to shut him off. I actually like the taking off of the arm more than I like the shutting off of him. Mm-hmm. Just because it is a wonderful visualization of Data is not what we would technically consider to be alive in some
Right.
ways. Like he can be disassembled and things like that. He is more machine than man in a lot of measures. But yeah, I like that stuff. It's Riker doing it is fine. It's all that, but I do like the general point that they're making with it. I think it's well done.
Yeah, and I like the scene where Data talks about Geordi's eyes.
Yep.
And if it's so much better, why doesn't everybody have them? I think like that. I wish Picard had responded to Riker shutting off Data by calling Maddox and then hitting him over the head with that pipe, and then being like, "Look, I can do the same thing. We're all machines here. There's an off switch for everybody."
My favorite line is Picard saying, "Lots of aliens have mega strength."
Yeah.
Mega strength. Yeah, and Riker obviously makes the judge handle his hard rod in the middle of this, which is a very, very evocative image. That's it.
Reich.
Let's take a break. We'll play an audio clip, and then we'll come back, and we'll give our final thoughts and ratings for The Measure of a Man.
Now, sooner or later, this man, or others like him, will succeed in replicating Commander Data. Now, the decision you reach here today will determine how we will regard this creation of our genius. It will reveal the kind of a people we are, what he is destined to be. It will reach far beyond this courtroom and this one android. It could significantly redefine the boundaries of personal liberty and freedom, expanding them for some, savagely curtailing them for others. Are you prepared to condemn him and all who come after him to servitude and slavery? Your Honor, Starfleet was founded to seek out new life. Well, there it sits.
All right, so since this is a Patreon thing, I'm not going to plug the Patreon, but it's out there if you're willing to look for it. So, Clay, what did you think of Measure of a Man? Are you going to give this one a 5 out of 5? It sounds, I don't know if it's been your time away from TNG or something, but you sound very positive on it. You didn't really have a lot of negatives to go for it.
Yeah, I am. And
Are you glad you watched it for Picard, too? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. No, I didn't even, until it came up on the Discord thing, I didn't even realize Bruce Maddox. I didn't even realize Bruce Maddox was a pre-existing character because I assume this is the only time he shows up.
It is, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it gives a lot of context for Picard. I think probably the core of the story of Picard is in this episode. And as far as the rating, I give it a 5 because I don't know. Did you go back or do you have on handy the ratings you gave for the first 2 seasons?
Yes.
Did you give any 5s in season 1?
No season 1 5s.
When's your first 5?
First 5 is Q Who in season 2.
Is that before this or after?
After this. It's a late. It's the Q introduction of the Borg is my first 5.
Oh, okay.
And it's much later in the second season.
I would give this one a 5 because I think you could show this. I think you could take this episode and show it to anybody free from context of any other episode and they would get it. And I think you could use this episode to be like, this is what Star Trek TNG is like. And I think it works. I think it's it's a fully contained story that I think works really well with stuff that you can get without having pre-existing knowledge of the characters. Data's an android. Picard's the captain. This guy wants to break him down. It's like fairly archetypal concepts that are sci-fi concepts that can play regardless of context.
Yeah.
And I would say this is the first great Star Trek episode. First great TNG episode.
A lot of people have said that. Have said that. Yeah, I think it is very good. I'm a little short of giving it the 5, but I do think it's good. It's in the there's a stretch of 4s in the second season on my scale that this feels very much a part of. They're very good ideas that they're just functionally missing something out of it. Yeah. And it fits in with the Royale. It fits in with Matter of Honor is this one. And then there's one other one, I think, that fits. Peak Performance is a good one, too. And it feels very much in line with those. It's maybe one of the top ones of those, but I still feel it's in that section of them. It's really funny to, we've been on DS9 and now Picard and Discovery and everything. It's really funny to go back and just watch the purely self-contained TNG episode. It's like they're just so different from what the series eventually became and things. And people are complaining now about the over serialization, but I think even DS9, you couldn't do this with DS9 for a good portion of its run and have the same. There were episodes of DS9 that stood on their own, but a lot of them pulled in characters that you needed to know about, or like you had some sort of reference point from a past episode and stuff like that. But this is totally uniquely self-contained to itself.
Yeah, the only context you might need is who Tasha was, but even that, it's like, even if you don't know that, you can get from the context that she's no longer on the ship in some form or another.
Yeah, he holds up, he has her little dead eulogy hologram thing in this that he plays it too, yeah.
Yeah, which, justice for Tasha and all that. But, it's funny, though, because this past weekend I was out with some friends and I heard someone, I wasn't part of the conversation, but I heard someone saying that they didn't like The Mandalorian because it started off with a story, but then it just started doing these stupid one-off episodes in the middle. Mm-hmm. And it's really interesting how it comes down to a matter of taste, really. Because The Mandalorian does try to straddle that line of episodes and larger story, and I don't think it does it that well.
Yep.
And it's sort of like, and I think I said this on our Mandalorian podcast, which, if you're new to the podcast, we covered The Mandalorian as well.
Yes, 5 years from now, we're going to be talking about 5 years from now, Disney launches a standalone streaming service.
Yes.
Just FYI.
But I felt like they kind of forgot how to do TV like this. Yeah. Where you tell a self-contained story that is completely you're satisfied by it between the opening credits and the end credits, you get a single story, doesn't really stand on anything else's legs, and it's just like a really well told story. It's kind of a lost art, I think.
It is, yeah. And not to go off on Mandalorian, I think Mandalorian stories were just too simple for the episodic stretch in the middle of it.
Yeah. I agree, 100%. Yeah.
That's kind of the problem. Like you do need to have a story going on in those standalone things to really stand on their own. I'm going to give this one a 4. Clay gives it a 5. I think the 4 holds up for me. I think it's a very good episode, very strong. And it certainly adds a lot of context to Picard, I think. I would almost say this is almost required viewing for Picard. Not in the sense of you won't understand what's going on, but to, I think, recalibrate yourself for what to expect from Picard. I think that this works.
Yeah. I wish, before Picard started, I went back and I watched I, Borg.
Yep.
Because I knew the Hugh character was in it. I should have watched this instead. I don't know if I'm going to not understand who Hugh is out of the context of Picard as much as this gives me more background to the story for Picard.
Yeah. All right, guys, thanks very much.
That sentence didn't make a lot of sense, but I think you got what I meant.
I did. Patrons, thank you for supporting the show. Hopefully you enjoyed our re-review of The Measure of a Man. If this is a normal podcast, hopefully you enjoyed listening to a podcast from the future. So thank you very much, guys.
It's just missing like a big John Parr theme song, like, what is the measure of a man?
Who can say what a man is? I think we're done.
On this open road, what's the measure of a man?
You can walk in a man's shoes, but you can't measure him yourself.
Yeah.
Guys, thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
You can walk in a man's shoes, but you'll never really know their size.
That's right. Thank you for supporting the show.
Because that's the measure of a man.
Thank you for listening, and we'll be back in a couple days with the next podcast, the next Patreon podcast. Otherwise, the show continues as normal. But thank you very much for supporting the show, guys, and we will see you later.